Hey folks, welcome back and welcome to my seasonal meet thematic autumn edit. And I know that I didn't touch on my summer edit in the end. I will try and make mention of that when I do my August and September wrap up. Here you can see a taster of what we've got going on, but it is quite a big edit this time. I've essentially really leaned into earthy, transitional meets decay vibe. You know, the liminality of this season as it moves us through that transition, but really slowly. And so sometimes there's that sense of not quite stasis, but there's just something about being sort of caught in the in-between. That's really what this edit is. It's a mix of things just as they are transitioning. It's a little otherworldly. It's a lot earthy. We've got the fae, we've got animals, we've got dreamscape, surreal concept, and then we've got a couple of hints of like more rooted everyday things just to kind of ground out that sense of liminality, because otherwise it can be a little bit floaty. It's a real kind of mood. And what I'm going to do this time around is show you the tarot decks and show you the various oracles that I might mix with them out of this edit, because that's kind of how I set this up. I would have filmed the process for you if it hadn't have taken about 4 hours. So here we are, and let's jump into things. As I say, I really focused on the tarot decks first, which we have 7 of, and that is whittled down. And then I experimented with all of the different oracles that I was drawn to, that felt like they encapsulated the theme, the season, in the way that I wanted to work in it, in the way that I'm feeling it. I saw what works, and went with oracles that matched with predominantly multiple decks. So there were some cuts of very thematic things. This is the Hush Tarot, and then I'll show you the oracles that I have decided will probably be good pairs, and then I can talk a bit more about each of the oracles and perhaps even read a few of the messages. But the Hush Tarot is wonderfully moody, definitely full of transition and decay. I love the art style. I used it a few years back for a year ahead reading, and it was really, really enjoyable, but I didn't get to bond with the deck enough, especially because it's quite obscure. For a deck that seems to have very Rider-Waite-Smith meanings, it's clearly doing its own thing. And yeah, I wanted to get more into that very fae-esque kind of world that it does feel like it's portraying for the most part. For this video, I'm just going to plonk all of the oracle decks in the middle. I might use them in a plethora of different ways, and to be honest, I will probably layer various oracles into readings at point as well. I really love like kind of a patchwork vibe. And the first one up is the Woodland Wardens, which is an animal meets plant deck, but it has that kind of softer, earthier colouring, and it's very balanced in its keywords and its presentation. Obviously it's very natural world based, and it feels like a sort of natural history deck as well. It felt like a really good pairing with the Hush Tarot. So what do we have here? 4 of Cups, the Devil, and the Vulture, and Asphodel. I don't know if I've pronounced that correctly. So we've got Upheaval, which feels very fitting because for the 4 of Cups, really sink into trying to stay emotionally grounded, but to the point where we become stubborn and inflexible. And that could be a part of trying to like avoid that upheaval, and that's where the Devil comes into play. Also, it makes me think of that saying, it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't. And really what the Vulture is trying to help us do is it's trying to help us learn that transition and decay isn't actually inherently a bad thing. They're an amazing cleanup crew. That's what they do. That's what they're about. So I really love these two together. You're going to see lots of plants. You're going to see lots of animals. They feel like a good colour match. And quite honestly, because I do so much animal work, I often end up not using the Woodland Wardens beyond pulling out the animal depiction for the month over on my Patreon and kind of displaying it and engaging with it that way. And there is a whole host of glorious animals in this deck. So I really just wanted to lean into a bit more of that and use it for, I guess, a broader version of its purpose, which I think I've said before. But I also think my familiarity with this will help me get more familiar with a Hush Tarot. And look here, we've got 3 birds and then all of the greens sort of coming together, the blues in this one. There's just a lot that complements it artistically, but also more importantly, there's a lot that complements this thematically. Moving on, I've got my combination, which I consider one deck because that's how I work with them, of the Earthbound Oracle and the Seeker's Lenormand, created by the same person, same size, all good stuff. And I actually read these as oracles, so my own interpretation. I honestly don't know what the Lenormand rider means. Sometimes how I interpret them syncs up apparently, so I'm told, and sometimes it doesn't. But again, I just feel like we've got that earthy representation in it. There's a lot of elemental stuff, and I think that they're just going to be another that are massively complementary. So here we've got 2 Cups cards, that's interesting. The King of Cups and the 8 of Cups with growth, because this is in a vessel of some description, and the cups, especially the King, says to me about being a really good container. I feel like that's what we need in the 8 of Cups, because sometimes we're moving away from something that actually was really familiar and perhaps brought us something really nourishing and just wonderfully passionate or exciting at one point and fulfilling, but no longer does. But you can see again the actual colour themes of these decks are quite similar. If someone was to try and ask me my taste, whilst there is an okay variety in my collection, look at the reds coming out with the cardinals and then the soul, so the sun. I'm a bit of a cliche for the things that I like in terms of aesthetic. I do like these washed out, moodier tones. I'm not massively into strong colours unless they're sort of held in a nice like black framing, like the Children of Astara. So you're going to see a lot of like beige decks, for want of a better term, but they may be beige, but they're not boring beige, if that makes sense. They're not beige in personality. Next up we have the Fairies Oracle, specifically because this is a time of year I tend to lean into the Fae, and obviously, as I say, thematically, to me it feels like there's some crossover between these 2 decks. I'm curious about how these ones go because I haven't used them together before, and often the Fairies Oracle is very dominant in its energy for me. And so with a tarot deck that I'm a lot less familiar with, it will be interesting to see how that goes in practice as opposed to theory, because I had a play around with all of these, but it's not quite the same as, several months. I love here that I'm getting the option to like look at the positions as well, and how we've got our first characters looking down and then these 2 are looking towards each other, which really gives me like a bit of an insight into the energy and how these 2 might be really beneficial through this experience. Again, using this as kind of like a free-form reading. As you can see, the art styles are kind of a bit different at points. We've got a lot of like blues in the fairy deck in particular. Then we've got the singers, which are really abstract, but I freaking love the singers actually. We've got courage, the Knight of Cups, and the Ace of Cups. It feels like a really emotive and compassionate form of courage. Maybe even for me like a truer expression of courage, as opposed to what sometimes we're led to believe it is, which is more of like a physical dominant expression, which at least for me is just not the case. So yeah, I'm quite interested to see how these lot go together. Finally, we actually have a new to me deck, and this is called the Almanac of Birds, and it's 100 divinations. It's a massive deck. It is incredibly difficult to handle, and one of my ideas is just to break a little portion of it and shuffle that little portion and pick. Originally, I was going to go through a card a day, or every few days and just change it out on my altar. But I felt that it really complemented the theme, the fact of how I felt when I read several of the poems and how their tone went. And then when I tried them with a few decks, it was not only just really moving, but it felt like the poetry had been written for the cards that I was pulling. And that was kind of surreal, and of course exactly what I am wanting. It says, the most immense danger is to live with a leaden heart, always on guard against being wounded, to make of the world an anxious projection, to remain asleep through the daybreak of possibility, never touching the great body of the unknown, sleeping alongside, never willing to take a chance on change, for the only heart that can be broken is the heart too ossified to open to the full range of feeling. It gives me the spark of actually actioning something that is growing and blooming within us. It's now bringing those things together and doing something with them and not being too afraid to take a chance. Like really building upon that in our physical world, in our material world, in our resources. You can feel the build of that as long as we don't step away from the potential. So that's all for the Hush Tarot. We've had a real blast of late summer, early autumn sunshine come through the window. I'm sure it's not going to last, unfortunately. But carrying on with the theme of very earthy, woodland-based decks, the next tarot that I chose was the Folkloric Forest Tarot, because it just really feels like this is its season. And you can see that again, there are a lot of animal inclusions in this. There are some fantastical scenes and sort of mundane objects as well, which I really love, especially because in the colder seasons I tend to be indoors more, so I tend to naturally engage with more physical items and objects, even do more like indoor altar work-ins and various things, because I do not take kindly to the weather. Between everything very obvious in this deck's title, the forest, the folklore, the fairies are going to return, because thematically they felt like they would bring just an additional layer. It's going to add that extra something about the beings that are kind of hinted at throughout this tarot deck, but not necessarily visually included in it. And I really love that. And as I say, whilst visually sometimes we're getting quite opposing sort of colours and a very different art style, the theme just spoke to me so much when I did test runs of it. Look, the movement from the 2 of Earth into the 9 of Earth, and there's the Guardian of the Gate. It almost suggests that we need to engage with the Guardian of the Gate in particular to go from 2 to 9 to the absolute bounty, like the pinnacle point of the 9 before we hit that kind of completion. I could see the Fae living in and about this, you know, behind the scenes. We've got the 3 of air, so swords, with the fairy godmother and the Page of Swords, which I definitely think we're gonna really want to channel or connect with the fairy godmother in these situations and really learn how to like balance our thoughts and our narrative with where we're at, and the gifts of those as well as the weight of them and the challenges. Kind of digging these two together. Adorable. Look at all those greens. The fairies is honestly one of my favourite all-time oracles, and I definitely needed more time to work with the Folkloric Forest, which came in earlier in the year, so I have had time with it. In the back of my mind, I knew that there would come a time in the colder months when I would feel drawn to this. What do we see in the forest more than anything else? Hopefully anyway, when they're left to flourish, are trees. So the tree whisperer, is it Whisper or Whisperer? Is one of the two. It's by the lovely Mags. It just felt like an obvious fit. We've just got the one keyword with this. I think that she on and off sells like new editions of this from memory and like other types. I've only got this one, which feels particularly autumnal. Certainly there are a lot of trees that have lost their leaves as well. A lot of sort of like getting down to the bare bones of things, which is something that feels timely. I don't think that that's surprising. It's less to do with the season for me and more to do with the accumulation of the year so far. Look at how the red on this snake is coming through the tree with its beautiful golden leaves and that really soft idea of nurture in between the 9 of Wands, and then strength, which we can see this wonderfully witchy figure here also has like a golden reddish tone on their skirt. So I think these two, again, whilst they're quite different, are going to play well with each other. I do sometimes struggle to mix photography decks with other types of art decks, but I just think that the tree one works so well. I love its wonderfully weird long shape as well. It's very tree-esque. It's like a living embodiment of what it's representing. I love hunting for the faces in this deck in particular. The idea that these animals would reside in and around here. And then again, Megs just chose some beautiful keywords. So this one's going to come up again at some point. Next up, this had to be a matching because energetically it works so well that I really don't care about the aesthetic. I think the aesthetic goes, but I'm sure people would look at these two and be like, no. So this is Into the Lonely Woods Oracle, which coincidentally was actually gifted to me by the lovely Lennox, who is the creator of this deck as well. It's kind of in the name, Into the Lonely Woods. It holds space for lots of different types of grief as well, not just all of the biggest, longest expressions of it, but the more microcosmic everyday expressions that we can go through, and even just the ebb and flow of change and how we experience that. So look, when all seems ended, which just feels so fitting for when we hit winter. I get a lot of SAD during winter. It might sound dramatic to those who absolutely love it, but I really struggle with it. And I feel like sometimes these oracle decks sound like they're going to do the thing that they say they do, and it's a lovely idea and it just really doesn't hit with me. For someone who's got quite a lot of oracles, I have got quite a bit fussier over the years, but the oranges, by the way, because I can't not notice the colour. Also, the King of Earth, Temperance, and A Time to Share, sharing that foundation of resources that we reside over, for want of a better term, to share, and that was how you tempered and balanced the world, even if you had little. I really love that, and it completely threw me off of what I was saying. But essentially, I was saying that this oracle, it's like it comes in, like most do, with like quite a bold claim about the kind of energy behind it. And I'm sure it's all about how we connect with the things mostly, because I don't really use the book for this, but the artwork, it sort of gently reminds me of Where the Wild Things Are, which was one of my favourite books when I was little. And I find it quite evocative and quite comforting, the idea of these like soft monsters of the woods, as it were. It's definitely a lot softer than the folkloric forest, which is a really natural representation. And so between the two of them, it's like this one speaks to, I guess, reality, and this one is the healing entry and invitation into moving through this. And it really lived up to its expectations for me, but honestly, I can't really say more than it was the art and what it reminded me of and just the general vibes, because, as I say, I'm not really particularly drawn to the book. And then finally, we have a deck that I have been meaning to come back to time and time again, which is the Maiden Oracle, which is predominantly a poetic, flower-inspired oracle, which has some Greek goddess inclusions and also includes the major arcana. And I just felt like it might be fun with this one. Now, I didn't try these for as long because I nabbed this one out at the end of kind of trying out everything and pairing. So it might not go down. It was actually pulled out for a different pairing in particular. But I like the idea of it. Here we've got 3 of Fire, so 3 of Wands, Healed Before through Viola, and then the Moon. And I do feel the weight of the moon kind of not only holds us in some of our harder spaces and the vast breadth and depth of our consciousness and emotions and all that that contains. But it is a nice reminder that we have been in the dark under the moonlight before, looking up at the sky and perhaps searching for something and moving into healing, and that we can do it again just as the sunshine comes out and makes a bit of a thing of it as well. It probably is the time of day I've chosen to record, but we'll lean into it because look, the sun's shining. This one's kind of in the dark still, but illuminated by these wonderful like moon spirits, which is one of my favourite moon representations, I have to say. So yeah, we'll see, but I mean that message read quite well for me. I really wanted to come back to this because it was a deck that, as obscure as it can be sometimes, not only in name, although these ones have been quite to the point, but also in the type of poetry that she writes in particular, I still connected with it quite well. So I'm excited to finally get into it a little bit more after probably a couple of years, actually. As beautiful as the sunlight is, I have taken control of it because I didn't want it to affect what you were seeing or, yeah, just visually impair anything. But next up we have the beautiful wooden tarot, and this is just an absolutely beloved deck of mine that again feels very seasonally fitting and has a lot of animals and has a lot of bones. Starting off by introducing an oracle deck that firstly I knew I was going to work with, and secondly I work with on its own as well predominantly, but I'm always curious about which tarot decks will complement it so that I can lean into the spirit of each card more and who they're representing. So for those who don't know, this is the Fallen Angels Oracle. I absolutely love the aesthetic and the grungy graveyard cemetery vibes, but more than that I love working with their energy, and I find it to be a really potent deck and was really drawn to it. So I thought, let's try it with the wooden tarot, and honestly it seemed to work, which is a lovely surprise because it's not one that always works with a bunch of decks in my experience. I don't know if it's a fussy pairing or it's just me, but yeah, it took a while to kind of fill them out. I've had the wooden tarot for the longest time. It was one of my earliest 𝗕𝗿𝗍𝗱 decks, so that was a whole experience. I actually did a really long walkthrough video discussing the imagery as well and trying to help people work out what they were seeing because there's no guidebook with this. And then the Fallen Angels is one that I've just worked with over and over and over again. I love the concept of recuperation for the Four of Pentacles and the Star. For me, the Star is as much rejuvenation and fostering something. It's like the idea of hope it's like a nice idea without sustenance, you know? Like to tell someone to have hope as if we can just grab it out of nowhere, and really it's something that we fight for and we work at and we commit to and we foster and nourish. And this idea of being at a place of finding stability, whether that's in the home, whether that's with our resources, not bringing too much in, not even letting go with too much, not being in that space of time. And it fits that kind of a liminal idea as well for me, that in this season as we transition, we might slowly move into decay and gently so, but we really, for me at least, don't want to take too many big, grand, bold steps all at once, and gently do so. And the Four of Pentacles comes in really strong for me in those instances because it's so much more than just holding something, holding on to the idea of stability and structure when around us the reality of that might not be the case. You know, it's important to have some of that to access and to anchor into as we move through change and all of the things that we don't have control over. So as you can see, this is a photo collage deck. This is a very different vibe. It was all about how this one felt spacious and supported reading with this, which is another big hitter for me. It's very similar to the Fairies Oracle in the way that I experience how big the energy is and the significance of how it often shows up. I did think the almanac was one that I could use with it. I'm not entirely sold, but I did think I would show it to you really quickly. In between those two, it says, "It is the nature of the mind to live in the confines of its ideas until you encounter something never imagined, some great profusion of the heart that suddenly enlarges reality and tasks you with being wholly alive." How freaking beautiful is that? Opening our mind to the idea that we could feel different and experience something in a way that we hadn't previously done so or forethought. It feels like it works. I felt like the Woodland Wardens would be a great companion for this because, as I say, whilst the animals have this surreal triple eye thing going on and they're kind of otherworldly, there is still this idea of nature and rooting in what we're most familiar with within it, even if it's the bits of decay and the bones that we're seeing. There are whispers to the ordinary in the extraordinary, and I love the meeting of that between the two. Here we have the 8 of bones, so the 8 of pentacles, preparation. I can almost see the squirrels now stacking these, you know, it just popped into my head. And then the 9 of swords, which can be a really challenging place mentally. And so if we are in the challenging expression of that, sometimes we don't think about stabilizing and preparing ourselves in the ways that are just tried and tested. The squirrel's great. And the chestnuts are great because they do this every year and they have in them the power to seed and root and rejuvenate. It's just a slower process than what humans like to see nowadays because we've got so used to everything just being so fast. So yeah, I think that there's something quite complementary between these two. And you'll notice that a lot of not all of the oracles, but a lot of the oracles have a spacious feel about them. There is an invitation of one keyword or one little sentiment for the most part, and then I can expand upon those, well, as far and as wide as I want to, depending on how I'm feeling, because I obviously work with animal gnosis. So that's a lovely invitation to add those layers in a greater capacity. But at the same time, in those moments when I'm doing readings and I'm needing to just simplify and get to the core and the root of the message in times of like overwhelm, it gives me that space. And of course, that's why I liked to pick several oracles for each of these, because then it allows me the space to choose. Bringing in an oracle that you haven't seen yet, this is the Sacred Threads. This was created by our lovely 𝗕𝗿𝗱𝗄𝗄. I wanted this in this edit, basically. It was one of those decks that was a non-negotiable before I had pulled out decks, before I had worked out if it was going to match with tarot. And so I really just found the few that I felt like it spoke with the best. And the wooden tarot, despite sometimes the art being a little bit more jarringly different, it just felt like it really did hold up to that. And Sacred Threads, for the most part, still feels pretty earthy. It still has very similar tones in it. It's quite a different art style, and as I say, that doesn't always jar me, but it just really depends. But it's just one that I want to come back to time and time and time again. I actually really love this with the 𝗕𝗿𝗄𝗱 tarot, but it didn't make it into this edit. I really wanted to find it some companions, because I will actually likely use this with the Fallen Angels Oracle, just the two of them without tarot. So that's the Queen of Swords and then the Queen of Blooms, who is the Queen of Cups with connection. I love the concept of bringing those two parts of ourselves together and the strength that both of those can have when, you know, our heart and our intuition is aligned with our mind in a nourishing capacity. You know, when they're not at odds with each other, that can be just the most powerful thing. And those otters are freaking adorable. We've got another otter. glorious. And you can see here why the sacred threads felt fitting for the theme that I had picked as well. I love how the moon here is, and the sea is sort of mimicking this part in the world card. And then we've got the sun here, obviously different but same shape. And the King of Stones like looking towards these as if he's thrusting himself through them. And finally for this one's pairings, it's on the nose, it's obvious, but why wouldn't I use it? It's the same creator. So Andy Schwartz, Skull Garden, and therefore they are obviously exquisite together. They are thematically aligned. Oh, look how the red in abundance is bringing out the red in this owl's eyes. And then on the Five of Stones, it's hard to see, but we actually have hints of like a reddish colour on the end of the antlers, which you could really read into as well. But I love the idea that it's kind of talking about the necessity of death if we think about abundance and how the two of those are related to each other. And I could go on such a big talk about it that I'm just going to carry on because I'll get away with myself. I don't need to show you too many more of them. It's just delicious, delicious, delicious. We'll do the Brady Tarot next because perhaps it's more of a surprise inclusion. I don't know. I guess it depends how well people know the Brady Tarot and also how you experience it, because to me, this is liminal, descent and decay, as well as the obvious other facets of the cycle. But in particular for an animal deck, it speaks to the reality of nature really well, and it doesn't shy away from those harsher aspects of it. It really just gets into it with you, and so there is as much joy as there is heartache, and I think that that's really important to me for an animal deck. It roots me into the expression that I wanted, and I do so much animal work with Patreons. I don't always do as much of it just for myself, and I thought that I would indulge. And what's not more wonderfully indulgent for me than 2 animal decks? So the Woodland Wardens comes back out to have some time with the Brady Tarot, because how have I not done that? I am real fussy about using animal decks together. Sometimes I find it to be quite kind of noisy. I think that, again, familiarity with the Brady Tarot meets the wonderful simplicity of Woodland Wardens, despite its very informed and what I believe to be quite deep expression. There's just a lovely complement. I also like the contrast between the two of them. Here we've got Passage, which is the Six of Swords, Devotion from the Sheep and Blackberry, which I love, and the Moon. Working with the moon feels like a devotion to me in and of itself. Moments under the moonlight, you know, in communion, whether it's nature or other spirits, in those moments when we're acutely attuned to whichever moon cycle it is, on more of like a personal level, it feels like a devotion to me. Sometimes when my mind is really kind of foggy at those points, taking the time to key into that and tend to it is a way to clear it. You know, it creates the passage through, if that makes sense. And there's a lot of movement in these two, albeit in different directions. The Brady Tarot is so hard to separate, however. So yeah, I just feel like animals, this is going to be my animal indulgence pairing for the most part. Welcome in another oracle that I haven't shown you yet, which is the Oracle of Oddities. I am so excited to get the new edition of it, but for the time being, I am working with my old edition, which is all 3 of them combined. And I mean, this is bones, this is insects, it's plants, it's all of the cycles, all of the expressions. It's a glorious selection of keywords, whether that's focus on different parts of the body, whether that's concepts, whether it's objects. It's kind of, it feels like it's got a little bit of everything. And spoiler, I will be having the Memento Mori out as well, but they feel very different. And actually the Oddities felt like a far better fit for this, and the language without like sort of competing with each other. It's not to say that I wouldn't use the Memento with the Brady, but there was just something about these two in particular. Also, there's a lot more subtle hints of colour in the oddities, and I felt like that was just a fun way that breathed a little life into them as a combination, bearing in mind, as I say, I might use 3 or 4 decks at points. I just really found them to be kind of compelling as a pairing. And also Oddities moves into, not that we haven't seen it already, but the skulls, that kind of side of things. As you know, I'm kind of biased for the Black and the Moon decks, but also because this is my aesthetic, these are the things that I like to see. If a season could have an aesthetic, this would be my one, despite me not loving the temperature and the weather. The vibes, they fit, and this deck kind of sits in that space for me in quite a fun way, although it can be really challenging as well. It's a bit of a sassy one sometimes. I also thought the Maiden would be a lovely way to bring a little bit more of a poetic fusion to the very everyday nature of the Brady Tarot, and thus the way that I tend to read it. I just wanted something that sparked a little bit more of my creative expression and perhaps pulled me out of some of the more psychological, archetypal facets of the way that I enjoy working as well. But it's nice to have a mix. Because the Maiden is predominantly plants, it still feels like they can share a world together, if that makes sense. As I say, I got the Maiden Oracle out quite late, so how this will be in practice will be quite an experience. And as you can see, occasionally we will get a tarot card, but that doesn't really throw me off. It's just them 3 tarot cards, very different archetypes. I kind of love how this peachy to reddish pink is in the vulture's face as well in Justice. So we have Justice and the Tower, which oof, the energy. And then this is met by the Mother of Horns, which is the Queen of Cups, which quite honestly, within all of this, which I am just not going to get into it, but does this not just feel like it's speaking to where we're at, like collectively at the moment, globally? Just so much of what's going on in the world, like the need for justice, the reality of being in the Tower, and the absolute call for the compassion and intuition and emotional connection that we are represented with in the receptivity of the Mother of Cups. Just, yeah, necessary. And finally, in the Brady Tarot pairings, we have the Earthbound/Seekers coming out one more time because, again, it feels like an obvious choice for me. I think I will mix and match any of my beige decks with most other decks, to be honest. Wealth coming up with inspiration and success. Also, what's really interesting here is in these Wands cards, whilst someone has succeeded or there's a spark of inspiration going on in this instance, things are still on fire, things are still happening. There is a real mix-up in the energy going, like whether that is clashes, whether that sparks. For this to be successful, so our coyote or whatever our lovely character is here, these birds have had to die. And when I looked at wealth with the beads draped over the crystals, for a second it looked like drops of blood. And it sort of made me think about the price of wealth in the more obvious sense of wealth, I guess. And perhaps it made me think of that because there was blood on the heart before, but I don't know. Those beads, they really are blood red. And it's so funny because I probably wouldn't read that at another point. Did we have an order for bones? Bones and more bones. Yes, please. I know that one's not bones. Now it's just going to show me loads of hands, but this is the Marigold Tarot, and this is wonderfully macabre. It's also really culturally invested. from where the creator is. It's just a beautiful expression of tarot through her lens and her world in particular. It's wonderfully pippish, which means it's wonderfully spacious. It means I can lean into my numerological stance. I mean, I can do what the hell I want with any deck, right? This is another deck that I used one year for my year ahead reading. I mixed it with the runes, and oh, it was really good. The runes and an oracle deck you're going to see come up. It's not enough to have one set of bones. I need 2 sets of bones. The Oddities Oracle obviously complements this wonderfully. As I say, I like the play between the darker tones and the beige. It's not as shocking as the white, although because there's white in the Marigold Tarot, I have mixed and matched it with like monochrome decks as well. But I like the warmness of the gold coming into the beige, just as more of a reflection of the seasons and what I am going to see as we move through the months. And I do like to consider that. It feels like I'm engaging with the outer world in just little fun ways when sometimes I'm inside. Of course, it's not like I'm not going to go outside at all, but I don't know. So I just wanted to show you a few of these ones because I actually want to throw in another Black and the Moon deck. But as you can see, they're a lovely pairing. When all the skulls come up, it just brings me deep joy because that's who I am. I was recently doing something with my memento, so hopefully I've shuffled it enough, because otherwise it will be in little themed groupings. But as I say, it might seem strange to people that I would have 2 decks that perhaps on the outside, especially because they're made by the same creator, appear so similar, but energetically they're just not. I will be engaging with Claire from Black and the Moon's ancestral practice that she has going on Patreon, and I do, as people know, a lot of spirit work with this deck in particular. So I like to have a tarot deck on hand as a little bit of an additional conversational piece if and when I want it. Not that this deck needs it at all, but because we're talking through symbols, sometimes a tarot moves it into even a more familiar language for me, and sometimes I don't want that or it doesn't work, and other times it does. So they felt like a really good pairing for each other, having known that the memento was going to be a given no matter what. It was just another one of those non-negotiables before I even started experimenting with what worked and what didn't. I did think the Marigold Tarot would be another prime opportunity to get the Maiden Oracle out, and there's still a lot of flora in the cards, and I like how those two complement each other, and these kind of whimsical borders around each of them. I don't know, they're kind of quite fancy, aren't they, the borders? They've got a little bit of something extra special going on, and I like the complement between those. Again, the contrast between the light and dark to dark and light. And then of course I felt like when I tested them out, they really sung together actually. Again, it was one of those ones where I felt like there was something really wonderfully poetic that was brought into this experience, which perhaps isn't completely void, but wouldn't always necessarily be the first place that I went to, unless I'd sat down to like do some tarot poetry in particular. How interesting. So look at the contrast of this as well. So we've got the sun and then the 5 of Cups, and the key word from hibiscus is, or the key phrase rather, is lust for dust. There's almost something self-sabotaging about that. But sometimes we have to go through that process, you know. We just can't enjoy something because there is something that we're just so compelled, or even just we need to go through, or we're refusing not to engage with. That kind of feels like a lust for dust to me. Fuck around and find out, even though we kind of know the outcome already. What I do like with this one is readings reading the poems sometimes as well. It's like a fun little luxurious ritual edition, and I get really into ritual at this time of year in particular. Again, it's not like I don't do it the rest of the year, but I guess I get a little bit more flamboyant, a little bit more extra, more ceremonial even at points, which probably isn't always the best thing because my body is not up for it, but hey ho, that's kind of how I keep myself sane and engaged in the colder months. And the last deck I'm showing you with the Marigold Tarot is actually my little Here and Now Oracle, which people often ask me about, and I believe it's out of print. This is an RE only keyword deck, which is just brilliant. And in reality, I probably wouldn't just do 2 and then the 1. I would probably pull 1 for each tarot card because I kind of love how that nuances the layer even further. But I liked the white with this. This deck was one that I wanted to use with a couple of the tarots, which are the end ones, which you'll see. It just kind of made sense for me, you know. So it's the most simple deck, but it's also wonderfully versatile because of that. I've used it for spread creation. As I say, I've used it to nuance things. I mean, hell, you could even shuffle and then just flick a few cards down as if you were casting them off the top because they're really slippery, and just kind of see where the words land and then turn them over. So much fun and potential to be had with these tiny little decks like this. And it's just pulling out the whiter colour of these cards as well. So not that it had to be an aesthetic mix, but let's face it, it doesn't make me mad. So that's the Marigold Pairings. This is the second from last deck, so we are getting through. I know this has been a long one, but I really wanted to take you through the genuine process of what the pairings would be like. And this is, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this correctly, the 𝗕𝗿𝗄𝗱 Tarot, which was kindly also gifted to me by Lennox at, I want to say, some point this year. And I have only used it a few times. I have been waiting for the mood to strike, but also it's one that I have found harder to find pairings for. You don't have to use pairings at all. Sometimes for me, I just prefer it. There's a joy to it as well for me. Like it feels like a creative ritual in itself. But this is a particularly spacious tarot deck, and I love the idea of adding further layers and really kind of getting a little bit more of a patchwork vibe going on. So I took some time to experiment with this, and I've had a few sort of, not failings, but just not massive hits, and I have finally found some that I like. As you can see, by the way, this is a ridiculously large deck. Its redeeming feature, other than the beautiful artwork, is that it is this really flexible linen cardstock. Super hand friendly. And what we have here is, I believe, called the Unnamed Oracle. It's made by a UK creator on Etsy called Witchwood or something like that. I've had it for a long time. And there's lots of, well, there's a skull in every single picture in this deck. But also there's just something about the two of them that just, I don't know. They're just a vibe. They really, really are just a vibe. This little deck is really interesting. I do put in reversals, because the idea is, if it's upright, you read this side. So for the card, it's industry. But if it's reversed, you read, again, always the right side. That's how I use it anyway, which is inaction. Or there's always the possibility to just keep them all upright, look at the surrounding cards and decide, okay, what one makes the most sense, or work with it as though it is the two places that we could be moving between, and working out where we are between those two sort of, I guess, contrasting expressions. So here we've got the 6 of Cups. Like I said, lots of skulls going on, lots of bones. It was a mood. That's what I wanted. Between the 6 of Cups and Strength, we have the Clover. So on one hand, we have good fortune. On the other hand, we have a risk. And of course, with risk, it's not inherently negative risk either. Risk is risk. We don't know until we've taken the risk what the outcome will be. And often we need to be in a place of strength to be willing to do that and to see that. And think about the Six of Cups, the times when we've taken risks and it's just filled our cup without being cheesy, when it's really paid off. Because I think drawing not just on the idea of something, but the memory of it, rooted in more of like an emotional experience, we tend to be able to call on those and to remember how they felt, and they can be really motivating. And so you can see with this tarot, it's weird because the tarot feels sort of soft and dark at the same time. And I love that, because I guess there's a lot of talk about the darkness, what we see in the shadows, and how that might express fear or challenges or things that go bump in the night. Just all of the things that can be like scary or harder about darkness. And I really love the softness of it. Nightfall, the quiet hours, you know, the animals that come out and how they express themselves in the evening. And the change from the daytime, the energy shift, it's not so in your face. You know, there's a lot of beauty in the night. Also, I guess these decks, especially the tarot, do give me a little bit of like a liminal, could be a dusk and dawn kind of vibe as well. I see it through those lenses as well. It's funny because whilst they're not really artistically similar, they use some similar key colours. This red is seen often throughout, and I really liked how that just pulled something into it for me, like visually, thematically, if that makes sense. I don't know if it does. I love looking at the little details as well. Like I say, I hunt for the skull, and then here in this Five of Hearts, look, the skeleton's got them across their sort of shoulder blade. So these two really pleasantly surprised me, and I don't have many pairings for the 𝗕𝗿𝗄𝗎, so just two more. And quite simply, one of them is the Here and Now Oracle, for the exact same reasons that I had said before. So I'm not going to take you through too many. What I will say is, how glorious is it that language gives us so many RE words. I just love that. I'm a little bit of a nerd. As much as I'm not the best writer or poet or even conversationalist, I'm sure, you know, my dyslexia definitely impacts certain things. They're things that I enjoy, and I'm quite passionate about communication and language. So this little deck kind of just adds some nerdy value to me as well. And finally, for this tarot, the Woodland Wardens, which may seem like a really obscure choice, but as I say, the Woodland Wardens is very spacious, seems to be a theme. I do have some busier and heavily energetic decks in particular, but they are outweighed by a lot of spaciousness, I feel. I mean, this one's fun in particular because we have the antlers going on, because there's a lot of antlers in this deck as well. So the Ten of Wands, the Eight of Cups, and the need for healing with deer and oat. And fallow deers in particular always gave me this idea of softness. I don't know what it is about seeing them, but their behaviour in particular, I don't know. I've had some really interesting encounters with them, so I love that. And here we've got the elk and ash, just temperance, the tower, and strength. And again, we've got the antlers mirroring each other. I mean, it's not going to happen more than these two times, but it was fun while it lasted, right? Ten of Swords, adaptability. Two of Swords. Going from the Ten of Swords to the Two of Swords would need adaptability. It really, really would. And to come back to adapting to the idea of whittling down our concepts and starting again between a place of choosing between like several routes as opposed to many and overwhelming ourselves with it all. Also, there is something about the colour tones in the two of them that still feel like they play quite nicely together. I think that because there is that inclusion of antlers in particular, it feels like animals make sense in this world that's been created, even though they're not massively overtly shown. We also saw wings at one point. We've got a bit of foliage here. The Ten of Hearts coming up with protection, and the Two of Wands feels really fitting as well. I sort of saw all of this as like our protection. Oh, here you go. And so we've got a crow, which I love. They are honestly like the biggest and best surprise pairing. I really rate them together. Really happy that I found free to go with this one and that I'm actually going to get it into rotation finally. And last but certainly not least, we have the Somnia Tarot. Now, I did back the new borderless edition and the Oracle. If they turn up, they will perhaps come into the mix, or this will get swapped out. I haven't decided. It does feel very different to me than the borderless, and from what I've seen, the borderless one looks like the contrast might be higher as well, and I particularly love the moodiness of this. I like the idea that it's held in the white borders because it kind of gives me the idea of a dream caught in a moment, that concept of like a Polaroid even, which feels very fitting, but the cardstock is just a little bit too big for my hand. So as a big lover of the photographer and artist and this deck, I did decide to back. But let's get into the pairings. So to those who know me very well and know what I like to work with the Somnia Tarot, they may be surprised to know that I didn't pick any of the broccoli decks in the end. I do love the Somnia Tarot with the Mushroom Oracle, which would have been perfectly timely, but ended up getting cut. Also the Seashell Oracle ended up getting cut for the Tree Whisperer, which already went with some other decks. And it has that nice blending of photography. The tree kind of stands out quite a bit in this. And the reason that I felt that it was quite fitted is there is kind of this psychological meeting between these two decks, given the creator's background in this one and the idea of sort of, I guess, exploring our dreamscape through that psychological lens, which can be a facet of the Somnia Tarot. And then with the trees mirrored in this way, we get these glorious portals, which dreams are kind of portals too, at least to me they are. And there's this otherworldly vibe. So I think that they stand really well together because there's something just not quite ordinary about this particular expression of trees. And yet there was something just a little bit more rooted that felt like it would still complement the two. So I feel like these are a really good option for each other and get me out of my, I guess, usual familiar pairings, which there wasn't really a problem with that other than I needed to whittle down decks. I love the idea of courage between the Seven of Wands and Judgment. I feel like that is very much the theme, but I also feel like these will help me get into the more surreal layer that often comes up when I'm working with the Somnia Tarot and the reasons that I'm drawn to it as well. It's not always just the sort of everyday readings that I'm doing with this. Look at this with the two knights looking at each other between expectation, literally mirroring each other as well. How interesting is that? I just love it when the visuals do stuff like that. It never ceases to amaze me, delight me, inspire me, all of the things. I love as well, listen between the Nine of Swords and the King of Cups. And the counsel that the King of Cups holds of the heart is a really great space to listen from and to foster in this Nine of Swords that's clearly leaning into the Rider-Waite-Smith and this idea of the harder parts of our dreamscape. You know, when our mind is playing tricks on us and our narrative is really just repeating the idea of fear and expanding it. So I think these two are going to work great together. Possibly surprising no one. White borders, simplified words, so many options. The Here and Now Oracle coming in and just bringing a little bit of something different. Oh, how can we reproach and recreate the idea of justice beyond when we get caught up into what we think justice means from more of like a personalized level, and we see it on a greater scale, and then how the Emperor builds that structure, like how we take space up and live through that lens, as it were. Oh, slippery slidey. I just love it. I think there's so many things that you can do with these word decks in particular. So it had to be included. Like I say, if nothing else, this goes with every single deck that I own, but also the white has given me a little bit of a pleasing aesthetic kind of fix. And we come to the end and the last pairing on this ridiculously and hopefully wonderfully long meander through this Liminal Descent and Decay full edit, and this is the Memento Mori, which is a tried and tested pairing with the Somnia tarot. And it might seem like a weird one visually, but the way that I work with these decks, the things that I come to them for, and the way that they express themselves, they complement each other and speak to each other so well that it's far beyond any sort of aesthetic hold up. And the Somnia tarot quickly became a firm favourite of mine, which is why I was sad that the cardstock kind of hurt my hand like it does. So it would make sense that something that I felt so compelled towards then might feel complementary to another deck that's just an absolute staple in my practice. Oh look, 2 5s. And the hagstone is very protective. So there is that idea of a portal through the hagstone, and we have just glorious amounts of folklore around hagstones, or adderstones here we call them, as well as one of their other names. And I feel like in a time when we're in the friction and the contraction of the 5s, the reminder to come into protection, and perhaps if it's not something we feel like we have natural access to and can offer ourselves in like an obvious self-care way, for those of us who work with the magical, for those of us who find such meaning in symbol and charm and talisman, it would be a really good time to engage with this, try and help ourselves find access to it in those other ways. Which really dishing out the 5s. Which is interesting with nettle and the ace of coins, because with nettles we've got that mix between healing and harm, and even the harm that they do when they sting us, it can have other beneficial properties, so I've read and so I've looked into. So there you have it. That is all of the decks that I intend to focus on for this particular edit. It's never a hard and fast rule. However, it does tend to play out this way most of the time. I hope that you enjoyed that and found it interesting. There is a possibility for me doing a Halloween edit, much smaller one, if anyone's interested. And also, if you enjoy my practice wrap-ups, then these are some of the decks that you're going to hear me talking about. But of course, I will be sharing my experiences of them throughout the months as well, so you get more of a flavour of like what I end up doing with them. And because I've gone for a thematic edit that isn't solely reliant on the season, although it's entirely complementary at the moment, maybe I'll mix that up before the season, maybe I'll take it in further, and it will even go into winter, we'll see. So I will keep you updated. I'm hoping to get a few more videos done, but we shall see. And if you have any requests, do let me know. But otherwise, I'm going to rest my voice now and see you again soon. Bye.